Do we need to bring back D.A.R.E for the 21st century? After 2 students overdosed off campus, parents in the Bellevue School District are asking the district to step up efforts on drug education. Rocky Heron, a retired DEA agent who now teaches drug prevention at schools on the West Coast, tells King 5 News that drug education can be effective, but it needs to be mandatory and held during school hours. Heron says when it comes to the dangers of fentanyl, schools are often reluctant to address the problem.
It's still a struggle for all of us to get in front of the kids. When people came in and said, we looked at D.A.R.E, we don't think D.A.R.E works, so we're going to get rid of D.A.R.E, the sin of our society was it wasn't replaced with anything. We didn't say, okay, let's go create a better product. We just stopped doing it. Okay.
So this topic is all of us together, you listening at home or in your car or at work. 888-973-5476 is the State Roofing text line. Travis and everyone else, do we need to bring back comprehensive drug education to schools, or would that be too controversial?
I mean, it'll be controversial because everything we do these days is controversial. But do we need to? Yes, I agree with this DEA agent. I mean, I was doing a little bit of research. There's actually a lawmaker in California who is sponsoring a bill to require drug education in that state. And I was kind of reading through what's in that bill, and there are some very interesting things that I think we could learn from what is in that bill. Basically saying that the most effective drug education is led by other teens who have experience, who can speak to other teens, who are real with other teens. That it includes, and this one I think is really key, includes parents in the education process. Not just like a parent to come and say, oh, scare the kids or whatever, but actually educating the parents about the dangers and how to use naloxone and all the things. That it's not just a one-time thing. Like, remember we would have like a D.A.R.E assembly and then we would go the rest of the year and not hear about it at all. This is an ongoing thing, not one day in health class, not one assembly. It's in multiple subjects. It's in history. It's in PE. It's in, your biology. Like, it's included throughout the day. And it includes having things like naloxone in the school, teaching the kids how to use it. So practical lessons as well. And all of those things seem like, yeah, that's not D.A.R.E. That's the opposite of what D.A.R.E was. It seems, because D.A.R.E was kind of like, again, no offense to any cops who did D.A.R.E, but like a cop coming into your school and being like, don't do drugs. And that was kind of, and then like take a pledge and wear a little sticker and stuff. What do you think?
The D.A.R.E program, 40 years ago, by the way, it was started down there in L.A. It was an initiative basically to get on top of things. Like, hey, let's add this to the schools, and we need to talk about that. And in my experience of D.A.R.E, I was thinking about how many times could I remember, during the break, I was trying to think about this. How many times do I remember the assembly where the school, we all got together and the cops showed up with the dog and did all this stuff, and then they said they had the dog go around with the lockers and all that stuff. I counted, from what I remember, maybe 4 times that I've been a part of it. Now, for all of you all that said you probably had a D.A.R.E program show up once a month and all that, good for you. But then I thought about something. There's 5 of us right here. And I want to do, Ursula always loves for me to do my research. I'm going to do some research right now.
All right, let's do it.
But the key to this research is everyone has to be really honest about this. You guys ready?
Yes.
Okay. How did you really learn about drugs? Joe, I can always count on you being the most honest out of everybody. Joe, how did you find out about drugs? Was it through D.A.R.E program, or was it through friends, or was it uncle, family member? How did you find out about drugs?
It was through both. It was through friends and D.A.R.E. And the biggest problem with D.A.R.E, and I think part of the reason it failed, is because they told me that marijuana was going to make me go insane and absolutely ruin my life, just like all the other drugs were. And then when I experimented, because I had a friend that smoked weed and realized that wasn't true, then I said, well, they must be lying about everything else too.
Good angle.
Yeah.
Appreciate that. Chef, what do you got, bro?
I mean, I learned about the existence of drugs from TV when I was a kid, and then D.A.R.E. And what I learned about drugs from TV and D.A.R.E. was that drugs made you a loser. If you smoked marijuana, you're a loser. Cocaine was likely, if not guaranteed, to be a death sentence for you. And then I learned it through personal experience, right? And I think that's the fundamental flaw of D.A.R.E. is that it lied to kids. And kids can smell BS like nobody's business. And if they smell a whiff of BS, they throw out every single thing that you are saying. There was no acknowledgement of why people do drugs or the fact that drugs themselves can actually be fun, right? Or that, you know what, some people actually do take them safely in moderation. And I feel like if we're going to be having conversations in schools with kids about drugs, Travis, I like the idea of peer mentorship or conversations, but also as a kid, like, I don't want to hear it from Becky. Like Becky, who's serving on the student council, and Becky, who's never seen a drug in her life, and she's like, guys, we all need to get together and talk about the drugs. No, you know what? I'd rather talk to, Travis, your uncle, successful guy. This is a hypothetical uncle. Travis, your successful uncle who has a career, he's been in marketing forever. He has a great house, two kids, 2 cars, a boat. But he was a, recovering alcoholic. And he was a functional alcoholic all of his life. They never talked about alcohol in the same way, by the way, as they did drugs. I'd want to hear from people who've been impacted, who've been addicted, who've gone down the road and said, you know what, it was a party for me at the beginning, and then it reaches a certain point where it is no longer fun and it takes over your life. And we just did not have those level of honest conversations.
Travis?
So I'm the goody two-shoes in the studio for sure, because I was in the Just Say No club in middle school, and my dad, who's a cop, was the advisor. And so I didn't have just a single source of information. I had my dad, I had the Just Say No club. My parents bought me books about drugs. So I read different, I remember this, kind of like one of those sex ed books that you get as a kid, but it was about drugs. But what's really interesting is I don't actually feel like I knew what drugs could do. I didn't until I got into the news business as a grown-up. And I actually started seeing the impact of lives, which is why I think what Chef is talking about is genius. And one of the things, the idea in this California legislation is, and I think we've all illustrated it here, is that everyone learns in a different way. And if you just present it as a fear factor, the best education is where you include it in multiple ways. And it's something that I was touched by the first story I did with a family whose son had overdosed. And I was just like, oh my gosh, this is a family that's like my family. And up until then, it was very cerebral to me. And so I think the idea of doing it in all aspects of school and having it learn the history of it, learn the biology of it, learn the addictive nature of it, talk to a kid, talk to a parent, hearing that. And one of those things is going to resonate with me. One of those things. And that's what I'm going to learn my lesson from.
Another thing I think was really harmful was the just say no, scared straight approach. Because I learned about drugs, basically the same thing I learned about sex growing up in, a conservative Christian household, which is if you touch these things one time, you're dirty, you're unclean, and you're ruined. But then you see your uncle who maybe dabbles from time to time and hey, he seems like a fine guy. They must be totally blowing smoke. But the idea, this DE agent talked about schools not being willing to host these conversations. Are parents ready to have conversations from a harm reduction approach about drugs? Because that would be part of comprehensive ed. Hey, we understand that kids will take them. How are you going to reduce your risk if you do? What do you do if you get in a bad situation, et cetera? And I think that would be very, very controversial to introduce to kids.
Yeah, I want to know what the texters would think about it as a parent.
The texters are blowing up the text line right now, and we've gone around the horn to find out how you've learned about it. And similar to you, both parents, law enforcement.
Yeah.
And the only thing that I got from them was, don't do drugs. Drugs are bad. don't do drugs at all. So you would think that my parents consider, I'd say that, especially my dad, around a lot of situations, he has more of an understanding, considering he's been around it, that he would take the time to sit me down and really explain it to me. But no, the person that taught me about drugs, and Chef kind of alluded to it, my Aunt Lula had a boyfriend by the name of Paul. Paul was a Vietnam veteran. Paul smoked, back then we called it reefer, reefer.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So Paul would sit there, and every single day, looking back on Paul was interesting, right? Paul didn't work. Paul was always in the house, and Paul was always sitting there on the couch smoking reefer all the time. And so one time we're coming, we just knew what Paul did, right? So we come in, and one time I came in, and I was curious. Not curious to do it, but curious why he always smoked that, and how come I never saw him smoke cigarettes, right? Mm-hmm. He told me then that cigarettes are bad for you. And I thought, well, my dad smokes cigarettes. You can't be telling the truth. Yeah. But the interesting thing about Paul, and the reason why I'm bringing this story up, is because Paul was so smart. Like, he was really, really smart. Like, after this, I learned so much more from him over the years. But when he was talking there, he was explaining to me why he does it. And the reason why he was smoking weed, he said, because it was for his PTSD. Yeah. Now, I didn't understand what that word was back then, but he was saying why he did it. And he was explaining to me why if I ever do decide to do something like this, I need to be older to be able to make that decision. So he's talking to me in this way. And the reason why I'm bringing up Paul is because I think I got lucky. And the person that discussed it with me was actually able to explain it in a way to help me outside of just don't do it. Or like Chef said, the just say no. And I think the just say no and just don't do it, I think that mentality is still happening today, because most of our politicians and our decision makers, they don't know anything else other than you just shouldn't do it and just say no. And that's why we are seeing the increase in overdose deaths across the country, because here we are. We've been having a war on drugs for 50 plus years, and we are still talking about, oh, we need more places to help. We need more drug centers. We need more help to help with these things. Why are we still building them? Why are we still talking about them? If we were doing the right thing by our drug crisis and problem, all of these buildings and establishments would have already been here. You know what I mean? And it would be free access to do these things, not just to people with money that have the money to go and get help, but right? Everyone needs help in this case. So back to the whole overlying point, Travis, yes, it does need to be in the schools. And I just don't think it would ever happen, because we have so many people that I think were raised like you and I, just say no, just don't do it. What do you mean? And what ends up happening is people that do drugs, or people that have family members that do drugs, politicians, police officers, firefighters, they have the money to hide those things. So people don't actually know what's going on in their family. The number one way to get to the bottom of this is to admit that we have a problem, and let's be honest about this problem. But we're not honest about it, Travis.
No, not even close.
We're not honest about this thing.